Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Jay Jones and DOE's Office of Nuclear Energy for asking me to participate in this webinar today, which is focused on educational initiatives and efforts currently underway at the Department of Energy to engage Native American communities in STEM education overall. Today I'll be sharing some recent efforts carried out by my office with the support of other DOE offices to elevate a discussion on the importance of STEM education to Indian country. I'll also discuss current programming that we are carrying out around the country, which provides a good starting point to build from, and also discuss the creation of a DOE agency plan, which will provide a roadmap to fulfill the recent executive order on American Indian education, which was enacted at the end of 2011. Next slide. Well, actually, no, keep it on this slide. I just mentioned that there was an executive order enacted in 2011, but DOE also has a directive that predates this to support the education in tribal communities, specifically those that are impacted by DOE activities. In relation to this, there's a DOE principle, number 5, which appears here on the screen, which states that the department will initiate a coordinated department-wide effort for technical assistance, business and economic self-determination, development opportunities, education and training programs. The education piece is the focus of what I'll be talking about today. Next slide. The second directive already mentioned is the Executive Order 13592 on American Indian Alaska Native educational opportunities, and also in relation to tribal colleges and universities. What's of interest here is that you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen in that column, the current executive order that's in force right now expanded the scope of a previous executive order focused just on tribal colleges and universities to have an expanded focus on all students, K through graduate school. Also, it applies to students in mainstream institutions wherever they may be, as well as tribal colleges and universities. In the second column, you'll see a requirement that is very unique to this executive order and really is unique in terms of all of the executive orders that might deal with underserved communities as well. For instance, historically black colleges and universities, etc. They do not have, their current executive orders do not have this federal agency plan requirement that the one for Indian education has, and so it is quite important. This federal agency plan requirement applies to the 8 named agencies, one of which is energy. Also, it applies to the Department of Education, Interior, Justice, Agriculture, Labor, Health and Human Services, and the Environmental Protection Agency. All of those agencies are directed by this executive order to develop these proactive 4-year plans, which to my knowledge no other agencies have yet to complete these plans yet, and so the Department of Energy in its current efforts, we've started the process of developing these. We are on track to be the first agency to actually have these done. The executive order, although it was enacted in 2011, has been in a holding mode for 4 years in terms of this agency plan requirement. And not to get into too much of the bureaucracies around this, but there are 2 executive orders right now that seem to be competing a little bit in terms of which one leads on Indian education. There's this one that I've mentioned, and then there's also an executive order on the White House Council on Native American Affairs, which established a working group on Indian education. And so currently they're trying to figure out which one of those, the different requirements in each of those will take precedence so that we can actually start moving forward on this. That's one of the reasons that we have not gotten direction from the White House to actually do these plans yet, or haven't been given a deadline to do them. But the department, we've decided to just go ahead and think that this is a worthwhile effort for us to undertake, although we don't have that specific direction. If you take into account the department's existing programs and resources, our agency plan would likely include how we leverage the following existing programs for Native students in tribal colleges and universities. There are various competitions, the Science Bowl for middle school and high school teams, the Solar Decathlon for college teams, the National Clean Energy Business Plan competition, and there are many, many more of those that can be leveraged for Native students. In addition to that, we have many internship programs both at DOE headquarters and at DOE labs around the country. I think many are familiar with the Tribal Energy internship held at Sandia each summer, but there are many more that we just don't get Indian students applying for. For instance, there's the Minority Educational Institutional Student Partnership internship that is run out of my office, the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity here at DOE headquarters. Just this past summer, this internship brought in 100 college students that were spread throughout headquarters offices, and we only had 2 Native students, which is not a very good turnout. So I mention that just to say that I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for Native students to participate in existing DOE programs that are not geared just for Native students. They could compete well, and they would open up a lot more opportunities than are currently on their radar. In addition to that, the department has energy literacy and climate change educational materials that can be shared with tribal colleges and universities. We have online STEM tutorial resources available for students. There are many undergraduate research opportunities at labs, postdoctoral research opportunities at labs, faculty development programs that can benefit tribal college and university faculty. And additionally, the development of an agency plan would provide an impetus for DOE programs to develop programs that may be dedicated specifically to tribal college, universities, and Native students. So I mention all of those existing resources just to say that in the early stages of developing this agency plan, which will set goals and objectives, these are the types of activities that would be taken into account, a strategy to actually roll these out, make Indian country aware of these, and figure out ways to get students and institutions to apply would be part of our agency plan. Next slide. So how did we get to this point? Well, it really started, the current focus that we have started with a DOE Tribal Working Group Summit that took place in Phoenix, Arizona last December 11th and 12th that was convened by Secretary Moniz. You'll see him there. He's the gentleman in the middle with the very distinctive haircut, and he's surrounded by all of the participants, which included representatives from the 4 tribal working groups that advise the department, as well as several senior DOE officials as well. The purpose of that gathering was twofold. One, it was to strengthen relationships between tribal stakeholders and the department, and also to help inform the planning of a DOE Tribal Summit, which will take place next month here in DC. While at the gathering, many tribal representatives expressed that promoting science, technology, engineering, and math education should be a top priority for the department as it relates to Indian country. In response to this, the Secretary announced at that meeting that DOE would be hosting a series of STEM and Indian country roundtables. Next slide. Some of the recommendations shared with the Secretary at that working group summit fall under this one overall goal here: enabling education including STEM for younger generations and developing a workforce that can set the foundation for independence. Some specific suggestions that would promote that overall goal are listed here. 4 of them, I'll share 4 of them with you. The first one, greater use of technology-assisted STEM education to reach remote communities. Number 2, identify STEM models that work in use by DOE in the past and invest in them. Designate resources for tribal communities. Number 3, a pilot program for hands-on training should be developed, and I think this was in relation to energy workforce training. Number 4, highlight the importance and link between STEM education, workforce development, and economic development for tribes. Next slide. There's one within there that is missing, and it's a video with Dr. Eric Jolly. So can you back up to the previous slide? There we go. So as I already shared, many of the tribal leaders that participated in the Working Group Summit already know that STEM education is critically important for capacity building in Indian country. Additionally, STEM graduates are in high demand for well-paying jobs. So the tribal working groups that advise the department already know this. But I don't believe that same understanding and that same importance placed on STEM is shared throughout Indian country. And I say that because from my vantage point of working on education and issues at a federal agency level, I just don't see that focus on it happening in high-level conversations around Indian education issues. And I point as evidence to the President's tribal summit that takes place every December here in Washington, D.C. that all 566 tribes are invited to. There are several hundred tribal leaders that come to town for that. They convene meetings with very high-level agency officials. The president speaks to them. There are many cabinet-level secretaries, heads of agencies that convene working meetings. And if you look at the readouts from that is prepared by the White House, and if you look at the briefing materials that are prepared for the tribal leaders by the National Congress of American Indians going into that briefing, in the last 3 years there has not been a mention of STEM education. And so I think that that's a testament to the fact that there is a need to educate Indian country on the importance of STEM education. The focus on STEM education just is not the same for Native students and in Native policy circles as it is for all other communities. And so that's kind of some background on why it's important. Dr. Eric Jolly here, who is the president, or he was the president and CEO of the Science Museum of Minnesota up until a couple weeks ago. He's now he is the incoming president and CEO of Minnesota Philanthropy Partners, which is a coalition, I think, of 4 or 5 very large foundations based out of Minnesota. Education is a focus of theirs. He's now the incoming president for that. But he had some comments to share at the second STEM in Indian Country Roundtable on why he thinks that STEM education is very important for Indian Country, and also just kind of his perspective on Native Americans' kind of history with STEM. He states that it's not a new thing. And so with that, I'd just like to play his comments.
Decade have been jobs that require fluency in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematical disciplines. When we have to worry about brownout conditions at the river, when we have to worry about the spread of diabetes throughout our people, when we have to worry about whether or not we will have universities modifying the genome of wild rice, transgenic resource for all Native peoples, we need to take control of science. Science is a process whereby you generate a theory, you test the theory, and you revise the theory. So theory is a simple thing. The theory has been something that's right or wrong. The theory is a tool. It's a tool that helps you organize existing knowledge, predict the generation of new knowledge, and explain in some aesthetic sense the sum of the whole. Organize, predict, and explain stuff. What stuff? Whatever stuff interests you, the stuff that interests Indian country, our environment, our water, our health, our safety, our food, our heritage, it needs to be the stuff of science as well. Science is a process of generating a theory, of testing a theory, and revising a theory. The theory organizes what we know and helps us predict the future. A theory is nothing more than the best story in Indian country. That's what a theory is. We are storytellers. We are scientists. We are mathematicians.
Great, thank you. Next slide. Great. There's actually one. There we go. Thank you. The next couple slides give more detail on the 2 roundtables that were held earlier this year. The first one that we had was held at the Santa Ana Pueblo, which is just outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we held that roundtable on March 18th, 2015. There were over 50 participants representing state and tribal education offices, mainstream and tribally controlled institutions, industry, educational advocacy groups, and other federal agencies were also in attendance. Throughout the half-day session, stakeholders engaged in conversations aimed at negotiating partnerships and building collaborations around strategies to increase Indian engagement in STEM. This meeting and the one that followed was led by the Department of Energy with participation from several federal agencies and national organizations. These meetings are being used to both, one, elevate awareness of the importance of STEM to tribal nation building, and two, to generate specific recommendations to engage more American Indians, Alaska Natives in STEM. Next slide. The second roundtable was held at the Science Museum of Minnesota in St. Paul, Minnesota on June 29th. The meeting was held in conjunction with the mid-year meeting of the National Congress of American Indians. We had about 60 participants representing a broad cross-section of stakeholders. Senator Al Franken, who sits on the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, opened the discussion and stated his commitment to supporting STEM education for Indian country through his work on that committee. Dr. Eric Jolly also participated in this day, and you just saw the remarks that were part of his opening remarks. The recommendations from the first roundtable were built upon at this one. Next slide. Before sharing what those roundtable recommendations are that we're going to be building on going forward, I just wanted to make note that this effort is unique in that it's bringing together multiple federal agencies. We have the Department of Energy, the National Science Foundation, and NASA are very active, committed participants to this effort. So I think it's fair to say that the majority of the real science-heavy federal agencies are part of this effort. And then we also have the support of national Indian education organizations, including SACNAS, which stands for the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. We also have ACES, the American Indian Science Engineering Society, and then we have AHEC, the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, which is the umbrella organization over all of the tribal colleges and universities. One of the major outcomes of this effort and these meetings, these roundtables, will be a joint policy statement of all these respective organizations and the Department of Energy to build on the momentum of STEM engagement across federal agencies, STEM employers, higher educational institutions, and tribal communities. So these organizations, when we're done with this, and we hope to have this joint statement done, there will be a STEM policy statement for Indian country that was created by all of the science federal agencies and then the major Indian educational organizations. That's something that does not exist now. Next slide. There were 5 major recommended areas of focus that a forthcoming policy statement will take into account, and I'll read them now. This slide has the first 2. One, people thought it was important that it not just be a government initiative, that there be public and private partnership involvement, and so not even just Indian educational organizations, but also industry. And so we have a goal to promote collaboration between industry, federal and local governments, and non-governmental organizations to better leverage expertise and resources. Number 2, we have a goal around measuring results. Participants stated that there must be clear objectives in agency plans and a process for measuring what those results are. So just goals without actual grading and assessment at the end of those years was not enough. Next slide. Participants felt that tribal leader engagement was very necessary. They felt that it was not on the radar to the extent that it needs to be for tribal leaders, and that an effort should be made to educate tribal leaders on the relevance and benefits to tribal communities of a STEM-educated workforce. We also want to be able to prepare them to effectively advocate for Indian country, for an Indian country STEM focus at the national level. The 4th recommendation was that there should be strategic planning for STEM and career pathways, and that this strategic planning needs to take place on a national scale. So not just focused on certain state levels or not just focused on the Department of Energy, but rather it should cut across the entire country and all of those different constituency groups. And then number 5, that there needs to be a focus on student awareness and engagement. We need to identify best practices to expose students early to STEM, to pique their interest and prepare them for continued studies in high school and beyond, and STEM careers. And so again, these recommendations are going to be reflected in this joint policy statement, and they will also be reflected in the Department of Energy's forthcoming agency plan. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to share information on a few series of events that our office has launched this year that we will continue into next year. These are not all tribally focused, but they are definitely models that can be used to reach Native students. The office that I work out of, we work with all underrepresented groups. So we work, with all minority groups, tribal groups, as well as engaging women and girls in STEM careers. So all of these series, and I should mention all of these series are done in collaboration with related White House initiatives. Specifically, My Brother's Keeper is an initiative launched, I think it's been about 3 years now that the President launched that. And that has an overall goal to focus on young boys of color, although many of the events carried out under the My Brother's Keeper title also focus on girls. And then another initiative is the White House Council on Women and Girls. Our office is the leader for both of those initiatives for the Department of Energy. And I should also mention that these activities, these series of events, are either all carried out at Department of Energy labs, of which there are 17 around the country, or at science centers. There are thousands of them around the world, at least, I don't know, I'd say probably 300 or 400 in the United States alone. And so we have a memorandum of understanding in place with the Association of Science and Technology Centers that allows us to access those different science centers around the country and carry out activities. So the first one I'd like to highlight is the My Brother's Keeper Day at the Lab. And before I play the video, I'll just let you know that the first one, and the one that is the subject of this video, took place at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which is in the Bay Area out in California. And we choose the labs and the cities where these events are located based on whether there is a My Brother's Keeper, if they're a My Brother's Keeper chapter city. So there are about 160 cities and tribes, reservations, who have signed up to become My Brother's Keepers Challenge cities, where they establish a pretty high-ranking person in either a mayor's office or a tribal chairman's office that focuses on My Brother's Keeper activities. And so we're partnering with them because what that allows us to do is it allows us a local presence, people that are in the community that have already created the networks, have already, have access to resources and children that are involved in programming, and it allows us a way to pretty quickly recruit, 60, 100 kids to come to either a lab or a science center to participate in these STEM-related activities. And so with this one, I'll go ahead, we can play the video.
Are participating in the first MBK Day at the lab, where they can learn about STEM careers. You'll see here something. Who likes chemistry? We have got 3 volunteers to help me with this first experiment that we call elephant toothpaste. Is it doing anything? No. You need to add one more ingredient. This stuff is called AI. And what I want to do, sir, is bring that potassium iodide over there, dump all of it in there, okay? All right. Oh. You can only do this when I say go. Only when I say go, okay? Because 3 of us kind of have to back up this. Go! Wait a minute, no, right here. Dump it in. What are you backing up for? all things that the kids have never had an opportunity to see and understand what's going on right in their backyard. So to kind of get that feedback from them, I think was very special. I hope that other sites can do just as well as Livermore did today with engaging these students. And I, again, I'm really, really impressed with the level of dedication from the staff here in Livermore. It's not just check the box and do these things for great good. It's really these things for great good, and we need to maintain and build on it. Fantastic job. We're very, very appreciative.